Hey there, Gateway Life Groups. Hope you're all doing well. This is the Bible study following the overview of the whole of the Bible. And in front of us, we have the 39 books of the Old Testament going from Genesis to Malachi. And I unpacked on Sunday how these 39 books can be broken down into three sections. So from Genesis through to Esther, we have the narrative or the story of the Old Testament. Then from Job to Song of Solomon, we have the 5 wisdom books. And then shown in green, we have from Isaiah to Malachi, the prophets. And we showed how the prophets can be broken down further into the 5 major prophets from Isaiah to Daniel, and then the 12 minor prophets from Hosea to Malachi. And they're only called major and minor because they are either large or small in volume. We then looked at the New Testament, the 27 books in the New Testament. We saw how, just as in the Old Testament, we can break the books into 3 sections: story, wisdom, and prophecy. In the same way, we can break the New Testament down into story from Matthew to Acts, wisdom or the letters from Romans to Jude, and then prophecy with Revelation. And then we saw how, again, we can break down the wisdom section, the letters, into letters thought to have been written by Paul from Romans to Philemon, and then the other letters from Hebrews to Jude. And we looked at Vaughan's 8 P's for breaking down the narrative of the Bible. And we saw how this starts with the pattern of the kingdom in Genesis chapter 1 to 3. And we saw God's people, Adam and Eve, were in God's place, the Garden of Eden, and they were under God's rule and blessing. There were perfect relationships between each other and God and the creation they'd been put in. But this pattern is perished. God's people is no one because Adam and Eve have rejected obedience to God, rejected that relationship. They've put themselves in God's place, and they are as a result banished from the Garden of Eden, and they are not under his rule and blessing. There is disobedience and curse. We see this echoed until we get to Genesis 12, where the promise comes in. And this is to Abraham, and it's our 3rd P, the promised kingdom. And God's people are Abraham's descendants. It's Abraham who's promised that God will make into a large family that blesses the world. And God's place, he also promises Abraham a special place. And God's rule and blessing, the blessing will be not just to Israel, but to all the nations. So things seem to be going well in the story of the Bible. The people of God are eventually led out of Egypt by Moses. They're given the law. They've taken the land, and eventually kings are put in place. And the high point is kind of Solomon's reign. But then we see this decline. And so really it's only a partial kingdom. So God's people, the Israelites, they are in God's place, Canaan, and they do have God's law and the kings that God gives them, but it doesn't go too well. In fact, what we see upon Solomon's death is Israel, this people in Canaan, dividing. And so we have Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And Israel, the 10 kingdoms there, are very quickly captured and exiled to Assyria. And quite a bit slower, the 2 tribes in the south, Judah, are eventually exiled to Babylon. And they do see a return, but it's not nowhere near the kind of glory that they had originally under Solomon's reign. So throughout this kind of division, the split, and the exiles, God's prophets are at work. And so there is this prophesied kingdom. And so God's people, the new Israel, including the nations that the prophets speak about, they speak about a new temple, a new creation coming, and a new covenant and a new king. And these are where the prophets work. So we see most of them focused around the southern kingdom. Then we get to the New Testament, the new covenant, the new agreement between God and man, and Jesus comes, and this is our present kingdom. And Jesus is the true Israel. Jesus is the true tabernacle, the true temple, the true king, and the true resurrection life. And he then commissions his followers. Here we go, prophetic hope, birth of Christ, in these last days that we're now in, to proclaim the kingdom. And this is to the church, which are believers from all nations. And God's place is us as individuals, and it's us as the church family around the world, people who are followers of Jesus, and then people who are under God's rule and blessing. They have a relationship with God and in the Holy Spirit. And so here we are in these last days, now looking forward to the perfected kingdom, where we hear in the book of Revelation about all nations coming to be under God. We hear of a new creation, and we hear of eternal blessing. So hopefully that's been helpful to remind and refresh many of you the big narrative, the big story of all the Bible and how it fits together. Maybe for some of you the first time getting your mind around that. So here are some questions for you. What struck you going over the whole story of the Bible? What are the pivotal moments in the whole story of the Bible that you would reference when giving a brief overview of the Bible? So someone comes up to you and says, tell me what the big story of the Bible is. What are some key points that you'd be mentioning? And then thirdly and finally, how can knowing you are in God's story rather than trying to bring God into yours practically change how you live? Hope that's been helpful.